The story begins with Dr. Seok, the best neurosurgeon in Korea. But because she had a very unique personality, she couldn't practice legally. Because she was expelled from medical school, so she was forced to perform illegal surgeries. On the other hand, Professor Chue was considered an authority in his field and also had a very unique personality. Although he hid it better, just as he leaves the operating room, a police officer looks for him and shows him a video of a brain surgery. Someone with exceptional talent, he was performing secret surgeries, and they wanted Professor Chue to help them identify him, since only he had the necessary skill level to perform a surgery of that caliber. The doctor says he'll watch the video later, but his apprentice realizes that it's probably the student he expelled a few years ago. For her part, Dr. Seok's patient had woken up. He was a very dangerous mobster, and thankfully, he was in perfect condition. But one of the nurses who assisted her already knew her and was upset because she had been paid less than the others, so she talks to her and tells her that she knows her secret. But Seok replies that she doesn't care if she reveals it. Everyone knows she lost her medical license. But even so, the nurse tells her that she has to give her 3 million won every month or else she'll report her to the police. In the end, Seok has to accept, and the nurse leaves with a smile. But what he didn't know was that behind that sweet and innocent appearance, there was a psychopath. Dr. Seok wasn't going to pay those 3 million won, so after taking everything apart, she tells her assistant to go ahead while she takes care of some very important matters. Important matters? It turns out she had asked the nurse to stay so she could give her the money, but she had drugged her so she would fall asleep. And when the nurse wakes up, it's already too late, because after trying to blackmail her, not only will she get no money, but she'll lose her life. When her assistant realizes it, there was nothing he could do anymore. He arrives at the place and finds the nurse life, but instead of being surprised, he just scolds Seok and immediately starts cleaning up. For his part, Dr. Choi had already discovered that it was Seok who was behind those illegal surgeries, so he tries to look for her everywhere. That's how he meets Mr. Min. When he contacts Mr. Min, he tells him that he doesn't know her. That video was sent by the Chinese, and the doctor in the video is very famous in the underworld. Everyone wants her on their team. For her part, she had a pharmacy as a front, and one of her clients asks her why she was gone for 2 days. She tells her that an evil woman wanted to take her money, so she had to kill her. The old lady just laughs, thinking it was a joke. When leaving work, there was a criminal in front, and he kept staring at Seok. When she gets home, she tells her assistant that she's fed up with him, and he replies, "Please, don't kill me." She answers that she's not a psychopath who goes around killing everyone who annoys her, but her assistant knows that she actually is. Then Professor Choi calls her and says that he says answers psychopath to everything fed up. Psychopath, that psychopath who medicine. It turns out that the professor forbade her from operating again, and because of that, she got so upset that she tried to kill him in front of everyone, so they had to expel her. She begged Dr. Choi to give her one more chance, but he simply ignored her. She never forgave him for that, so she didn't want to see him again, but he had found her address. In the end, her curiosity got the better of her, and she agreed to talk to him. Kate tells him to get to the point, and he tells her that he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and it's in a very complicated place, so only she can operate on him. Seok laughs and tells him she won't do it. He tells her that he knows about the illegal surgeries, and if she doesn't help him, he'll tell the police. She, furious, answers him that he can't ruin her again. As he leaves her house, Professor Choi suffers an attack, and when he tries to take his medicine, Seoke breaks it. Would he go to take revenge for expelling her from medical school? But luckily his assistant called an ambulance, and they were able to save his life. Now we see how this problem started. In her university years, Seok became obsessed with Dr. Choi because she had read his work and knew he was the best, and she wanted to be like him. She wanted to be the best neurosurgeon in the world. But at first, the professor felt that she was too strange, but as they spent more time together, he saw himself reflected in her, because at her age, he was exactly the same. And he knew that if he taught her, she could even become better than him. That's how a mentor and apprentice relationship was formed. Back in the present, Professor Choi goes to visit the doctor who used to get him illegal surgeries. The professor tells him that he has a tumor and wants Seoke to operate on him. so he asks him to help convince her. Then Dr. Han goes to see her and asks her to help the professor, since he promised to get her medical license back. But Seok wasn't interested in that. He didn't want to save the life of the professor who ruined his life. At night, he burns all the memories he had from medical school. She admired Professor Choi so much that she kept all the perfect grades he gave her. The next day, Seok was in a very bad mood. To top it all off, the criminal from across the street asks her out, but then she sees him hitting his younger sister and Seok goes to the restaurant to make him stop. The criminal's sister was always bruised, but Seok knew he couldn't help her because she didn't want her brother to go back to prison. Then Dr. Han calls her and tells her she has a new operation to perform. Excited, she quickly heads out to do it. Meanwhile, her assistant was finding out more about the relationship between Professor Choi and Seok. A nurse tells her that everything started to go wrong when Professor Choi sent another student abroad instead of Seok. She never forgave him for stealing her spot, and from that day on, she was never allowed to operate again. Until one day, Professor Choi had gone to a conference, and Seok took advantage of that to operate on a patient. But when he came back, he took her out of the operating room. That's when she lost her mind and tried to kill him. And that day, she lost her medical license and was expelled from her specialty program. The next day, Professor Choi was still insisting that Seok operate on him. She tells him she won't do it. Watching a tumor end his career will be the best possible revenge. But he assures her that he will get the surgery done, one way or another. Later, we see that Professor Choi's illness was progressing very quickly. His pain was getting worse, and he had to resort to an experimental drug. For his part, Seok was starting to relax, but suddenly he sees the criminal standing in front of his house. And when he goes to check, he discovers that he had been spying on her for a long time. To make things worse, some men tell him that his favorite restaurant is about to close because the criminal keeps asking his sister for money. This makes Seok furious, and her assistant begs her not to do anything crazy. The next day, Seok goes to the restaurant and tells the criminal that she accepts his invitation to go out. He gets happy because he thought he had finally won her over, but he didn't know that she was planning to kill him. Later, by chance, they meet on the outskirts of town, and she gives him a ride in her car, then offers him a drink. When they get home, he thought she wanted to get intimate with him, but the drugs take effect, and he falls completely asleep. When he wakes up, he was tied up. Seok doesn't hesitate for a second and kills him without batting an eye. When he's done, he asks his assistant for help. He wants him to burn all the evidence from his house. While she gets rid of the body, his assistant quickly puts on his cleaning kit and starts eliminating all the evidence. Meanwhile, Seok was going to bury the body in the forest, but he didn't imagine that Dr. Cho would go looking for him. The curious thing is that he wasn't surprised, because he also killed people. Many years ago, Dr. Cho had to operate on a friend, but he actually wanted to kill him. When she found out, Dr. Seok ended up saving his life. That's why he got angry with her and forbade her from operating again. She told him she did it for his own good, so there wouldn't be a stain on his reputation, but he denied everything and forbade her from operating again. Back in the story, Professor Cho tells her to stop killing people and to resume her career as a neurosurgeon. He tells her that he'll help her go far, but Seok tells him that she's not going to operate on him and to stop bothering her. Then Professor Cho's assistant calls him, and so he doesn't get suspicious, tells him that Seok wasn't doing anything wrong. The next day, the police were looking for the criminal, but since he was a convict, they thought he had escaped. For her part, Seok was happy because now they won't close her favorite restaurant, but her happiness doesn't last long. Because at that moment, Professor Cho orders her pharmacy to be shut down. And not only that, but also Dr. Han's clinic. So now operating illegally is no longer possible. This really upsets Seok, who calls the professor, and he tells her that she needs to go to Busan to sort things out. That day, the Shichida Awards for Best Doctor of the Year would be held in Busan. Seok hears that the hostess' son is dying, and because of his condition, no doctor dares to operate on him. When he hears this, Seok wants to operate on him. In exchange, he asks the hostess not to give the award to Dr. Cho. Mrs. Shichida doesn't believe it's possible, but Seok tells her that she is the best in the country and has already performed a very similar surgery. In the end, Mrs. Shichida asks him to leave because it was too risky, but Seok tells her that she is his only option, and his offer expires. The offer stands only until the ceremony begins that night. During the pre-party, Mrs. Shichida asks the professor about his star student. He tells her that Seok is the best, better than 100 of his students together, and that's why she is his greatest pride. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Shichida goes to Seok, asks her to save her son. Then Seok calls her entire team and they go to Japan. During the surgery, Mrs. Shichida was very nervous, but things went slightly wrong. Seok accidentally broke a vein, but he was still able to complete the surgery and everything turned out as they expected. Because of that, the award for Best Neurosurgeon went to someone else, Seok. She was happy because she thought she had humiliated Professor Chue, but what she didn't know was that he was aware of everything. He was the one who told Mrs. Shichida to accept her student's offer. For her part, Seok was very happy, and when she left the award ceremony, she ran into the son of Professor Chue's friend. It turns out that after the surgery, the man disappeared. He told his son that he would be free and asked him never to look for him. At the same time, some police officers talk to Dr. Chue and tell him that they found clues about the underground neurosurgeon and want him to help them identify who it is more quickly. He knew it was a Seok and went there so they wouldn't catch her so easily. Although he tried to divert their attention, in the end the police ended up finding the nurse's body. Chue knew that the killer was worse because she wasn't his first victim. When he was in college, he was already killing and controlling people. One day, the professor went to see her, and that's when he discovered her macabre secret. A man who didn't try to abuse her, was her first victim. She said it was in self-defense, but since that could ruin her career, she hid the body. Professor Chue wasn't surprised and even offered her his help. Back to the story. The police launched a major operation to catch the nurse's killer. When Seok finds out, he returns to the crime scene and sees Professor Chue trying to protect her. She tells him that even so she won't operate on him. Now he will look for the man he killed to destroy him. Later, Seok meets with Ki-jun, who shows him a video of a nursing home that might have his father, since most of them were admitted against their will. And there was a senile old man who looked a lot like his father, so he decides to go check. When they arrive at the hospital, it was closed. The person in charge tells him that it was indeed his father because he had the scar from the surgery on his head. Also, the man tells him that someone with gray hair took him away. Even so, they were still doubting if it was really him, so the man asks a friend to send him the photo where all the patients appear, but hours go by and he doesn't send it. In the end, the man tells them to come back tomorrow. The boy jumped at him and pushed him. The man cut his hand, and when Seo treated him, he discovered that he was wearing Ki's father's ring. He pushed him. It's confirmed that he was at the hospital. When the boy finds out, he runs after him. But the man tries to escape and pushes him, causing them both to start fighting. But during the fight, they reach a cliff and both fall. The man dies, and as he pushed him, he cut his hand and closed his back. He approached Cut, and when he arrived, he closed and moved closer to his back. He was there, pushed the man who cut and approached. He pushed him, got cut on his hand and back, then again approached and pushed. At the hospital, he throws something, approaches, goes home and pretends to have a quiet night. But in reality, he had a secret shed where he hid his late friend's car. It was in that car where he took his life. Now, he was planning to do the same thing to a detective who discovered that Seok was the nurse's killer. The next day, we see that Seok went out hunting because she was really stressed. Meanwhile, Professor Chue found out that Ki-yoon is in critical condition. Also, the police were interrogating Seok. Then they both meet, and Professor Chue tells him that they found Rottweiler hair on the nurse's clothes. So he warns her that she needs to be more careful, but she replies that he shouldn't meddle in her business. For his part, the detective was investigating the disappearance of his subordinate. When he checks his call history, he discovers that the last person he spoke to was Professor Chue. In addition, the team captain was colluding with an illegal surgery ring, and he informs the criminals that they need to take care of the informant. Meanwhile, Seok was worried because she would have to get rid of her dogs so she wouldn't get caught. But then Dr. Han arrives and tells her that everyone is worried about her. But Seok tells him that she's fine. She's just sad because she can't operate anymore. Dr. Han tells her to hold on a little longer and to try to comfort her assistant. because he is the one who worries about her the most, since she saved his life many years ago. He had a tumor in his head, and because he didn't have enough money, he couldn't get surgery, so he had given up and was just waiting for his death. Until he met Dr. Han and Seok, she was fascinated by his tumor. He was willing to operate on him free of charge, even though his assistant had already lost the will to live. Seok scared him and told him that if he didn't get surgery, the tumor would grow so much that it would kill him slowly and painfully. He got so scared that he agreed to the surgery, and from that day on, he promised to serve him in return. The next day, the assistant is kidnapped, and to protect Seok, he tells him that he's busy studying, but she goes to his academy. And when she doesn't find him, she starts to suspect him. But he was being beaten by some gangsters. They wanted to know who killed the nurse, but the assistant refused to talk. For his part, the detective got Mr. Min's number and wanted him to help find the nurse's killer. But he suspected it was Seok. So he calls Professor Chue and tells him that if he doesn't help, he'll tell everything to the police. He agrees to meet with him. Mr. Min tells him that he has to help with a very important surgery. The professor agrees because he really wanted to protect Seok. Then the Chinese mobsters had no choice but to call Seok because his assistant refused to talk. Annoyed, she talks to the boss and tells him not to get involved in her business. She can handle her problems on her own. The criminal warns her that if she causes them any trouble, things will go badly for her. In the end, Seok leaves with his assistant and tells him that he wants to move to the Philippines. He replies that he doesn't want to go, but she insists on running away because she doesn't think she can handle the criminals. Suddenly, the firefighters head to her house. It turns out that her shed had burned down with her dogs inside. She knew it was Professor Chue's doing, so she calls him to confront him. He tells her that was the only way to destroy the evidence and keep her from being linked to the nurse's death. She asks to meet him, and when she finds him, she bumps into him from behind. He gets out and wants her to run him over, but Seok simply drives away. The next day, Mr. Min visits them and tells them he has a very special job for them. Seok says she's not interested, but when he tells her she'll be operating on a brain, she agrees. On the ship, Seok is surprised to see that she will be Professor Chue's assistant. She wanted to be the main doctor, but the patient had specifically requested him. Later, Seok was alone at the bow, and Professor Chue approached to tell her that she should thank him for saving her from going to jail. Seok tells him that he shouldn't have burned her dogs alive, to which the professor replies that it wasn't such a big deal. When she hears this, Seok goes crazy and starts hitting Professor Chue. Luckily, her friends arrive to stop her. The next day, the professor meets the patient. It turns out he was a very famous pastor, known as an immortal. That's why he had to have surgery illegally, because if anyone at his church found out, he would lose all credibility. Also, he had to do it at night, so he could pretend to go to sleep and wake up healed, as if it were a miracle. During the surgery, Professor Chue tells Seok what to do. As if she were his student again, she listens to him and they start working together. Despite his illness, Professor Chue was still an excellent surgeon. His hands didn't tremble, not even for a moment. He was also very happy to operate again with his beloved student. After the surgery, Seok goes to talk to him and thanks him for everything he did for her. Even though she hates him a lot, she still has a lot of respect for him. Once they got back to land, the mobster quickly gets rid of Professor Chue and takes the others out to eat to celebrate. Seok was suspicious of Mr. Min. He knew he was up to something, so he gets rid of his assistant and asks to speak with him alone because he was planning to finish him off. Before he can do anything, one of his former colleagues calls him and tells him he doesn't have much time left. Professor Cho's illness was worse than he expected. Also, at that moment, the professor appears and takes Mr. Min with him. He knew exactly what he had planned to do and killed him before he could talk to the police. Seok had seen everything, and his friend was very worried because he was afraid they would get caught. But Seok was more worried because the professor was in really bad condition. And even if he operated on him, his chances of survival were very low. Meanwhile, the detectives had found Mr. Min's body, and the medical examiner tells them that the killer was someone very meticulous and with great medical knowledge. Also, he did it in a place with only one camera and didn't show his face. but the detective had seen him, although he didn't want to turn him in because they had known each other since childhood pansia. Meanwhile, Seok had finally decided to operate on Professor Chue, even though the chances of success were really very low. The professor, for his part, had brought a doctor from the United States to be the main doctor. He was very excited because he had seen videos of Seok's skills. He also mentions that he had a friend exactly like her, a genius in the operating room, but outside of it, he was eccentric, and that's why he hardly had any friends. Later, the Chinese mafia boss calls Seok to congratulate her for getting rid of Mr. Min. Now, with no witnesses, the case will be closed soon. Also, as a thank you, he offers her his help. On the other hand, the detective contacts Professor Cho to tell him that he already knows he is the killer of Mr. Min, and he suspects that he also killed the other people. Choi doesn't confirm it, but he doesn't deny it either. He just threatens him. And he tells him that he knows he's corrupt and that he hides evidence to extort criminals. And he warns him that if he turns him in, he'll do the same. In the afternoon, we see that Kijun had died, and at his funeral, Seok asks Professor Cho why he killed the boy's father. He answers that it was because of her, because the man knew she had talent and wanted to take her with him to Los Angeles so she could work at his private hospital. Upon hearing this, Seok tells him that he understands and that he would have killed him too. Then he asks him why, if she was his favorite student, Seok had to operate on him again. He answers that it was out of shame. He wanted Seok to control himself and not kill people when he feels upset. But he did exactly the same thing and pushed her away because he couldn't reproach her for anything anymore because he was exactly the same. Upon hearing this, Seok tells him that he feels happy and doesn't want him to die. Now he knows that he's worse off than he said and wants to operate on him, even if it's difficult. He answers that he doesn't want her pity, but Seok tells him that if he doesn't accept, she'll force him. Later, she goes to look for an operating room, but only finds a small one that barely works. Even so, Seok was able to operate anywhere, but once again, they would face an obstacle. The detective managed to discover that Seok was with Mr. Min on the day of his death, so they call her to testify. But the detective knew that Professor Chue was actually protecting her, so he wants to use her to bring him down. But the professor had already foreseen all of this. He would take all the blame and leave Seok clean, with his tumor practically inoperable. He accepted his death and was putting his life in order to leave this world. So on the day of his surgery, he calls the detective and shows him his colleague's corpse. Cho had his colleague's confession, where he admitted to being corrupt. With that, he threatens him into leaving Seok alone and instead focus on catching him. Then, the doctor from the United States arrives at the operating room and tells Seok that Professor Cho won't be coming because he had already planned the entire operation himself. He also confesses that he had been taking an experimental drug and that made his condition worse, so he won't be able to operate on him there. He also reveals to her that she won't be the lead surgeon. Upset, she wants to go look for him, but Professor Cho had already hidden himself. He would return in exactly 1 month for his surgery. All of this was because he wanted to fulfill his greatest dream, which was to die in an operating room. In addition, he wanted his condition to get worse so he could make sure Seok wouldn't be able to save him. The next day, Seok calms down a bit and starts to understand Professor Cho's plan. He wanted to give her something she never had. He wanted his student to botch a surgery for the first time, so that she could know her limits and become better. In addition, the doctor he brought from the United States would be her rival. They would both compete to see who is better to ensure her success. Seok wants to operate on Professor Cho as soon as possible, but he didn't want to be found. Seok was just as stubborn as he was, so she goes to the mafia boss and asks him to help her find the professor. The police also issue a statement and accuse Professor Cho of being the main suspect in the recent deaths that happened in the city. In the end, with great pain, Dr. Chue has to call Dr. Han. That's how the mafia boss manages to find him. For his part, Dr. Han asks him to agree to the surgery and not to cause her serious trauma. Professor explains to Seok that this is the only way to make her better and stronger. Seok must learn to lose so he can surpass his teacher. This was his only chance, and he didn't intend to waste it. At night, Seok meets with the detective. He tells him that he already knows everything and that he made a deal with Professor Chue to avoid finding him until the day he dies. But Seok tells him that he is not going to die because she will operate on him and save his life. The detective replies that it's better if she doesn't do anything, but as expected, she doesn't listen to him. On the other hand, the mafia boss tells Seok that he found Professor Cho, but when they are on their way to see him, the detective crashes into them. He wanted to break Seok's hand, so he couldn't operate. Her assistant tries to defend her, but the detective was too strong. So in the end, Seok ends up killing him. At the same time, Professor Cho managed to convince everyone to let him die, and that it was the right thing to do, because he was exactly like her, and he didn't want her to make the same mistakes he did. He wanted her to be better. That's why he has to die so she can move on. But right at that moment, Seok calls the mafia boss and asks him to connect him with Professor Cho. When he talks to him, he tells him to visit her and ask why she killed his police officer friend. When he meets her, he grows convinced he must die or she won't change. She keeps so tells her and over that she has been. Professor Cho, she tells him again that she doesn't want it and that she wants him to stay alive so he can see the extraordinary doctor she will become. But Professor Cho hits her and tells her she must accept his conditions or else he will take his own life. In the end, Seok has no choice but to accept. Sometime later, the call he had been waiting for finally comes. The operation for Professor Cho will finally take place in the operating room. He wanted to say goodbye to Seok, but she tells him to do it later because he is not going to die that day. And that's how this story ends. In the end, we see that the professor's assistant managed to save Seok's dogs. We also see that Seok had managed to save the professor's life, and now the two of them were performing clandestine surgeries together. I hope you enjoyed the summary. Thank you very much for watching the video until the end. If you liked it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any summaries. I'll say goodbye now and see you in the next story.